the Artemis II considered a pivotal milestone in modern space exploration? And in what ways does it differ from previous lunar missions such as Apollo in terms of objective, technology, and long-term strategy, essentially?
All right. Well, thank you very much for having me. Well, I mean, there are two ways of thinking about it. One is that this is really a different step. And I can actually frame it in there that unlike the 1960s with the original or the first mission, the Apollo missions that went up, those were designed just to go plant a flag and say, hey, humans have been there. Now, with the Artemis program, the idea is to go back to the moon and prepare for a much more permanent settlement. Now, so that's the part which in some ways is different. But I should say that it's not unique to Artemis, because China is also planning a similar type of mission to the moon in the next, actually very similar time frame, and also to establish a permanent presence over there as well. So I think, I mean, I know with the American system, it's sort of like, becomes sort of like, hey, nobody has done this before and things like that. But I think it's important to know that actually China is doing similar thing, and in some sense, it has turned into a new space race.
So, given that humans last traveled to the moon during Apollo in the early 1970s, I believe Apollo 17 was in 1972, what are the technical, political, economic factors that basically explain this 50-year gap in space exploration to the moon?
Yeah, so, and I think it is related to something that I alluded to earlier. The motivations for the Apollo program and at the time the space race were purely political. In fact, one thing that would maybe come as a surprise, but the only mission, the only Apollo landings, Apollo 11, 12 landed on the moon, 13 malfunctioned, didn't go to the moon, come back, orbited, come back, 14, 15, 16, 17, a lot of moon missions. But the only mission that actually had a scientist was Apollo 17, the last one. And that had a geologist on there. So that already tells you a little bit that the priority was not really science, right? And so at the time, there were, politically, it was all about the space race. But for other people, space enthusiasts, for example, they were all looking to the thing, well, that's great. First we go to the moon and then Mars is next, right? Like, and asteroids, and then humans are going to expand. But that didn't happen. So partly it's because of the expense. I mean, it was very expensive overall project. I mean, it spent actually a few percent of the GDP of the US just on the Apollo program to get humans on the moon. But there were no plans of sustaining it. There was no will to sustain it. And I think one of the ways that NASA thought, and this is again one of those things of the directions of the space program, was that, well, the way you go to the moon is to have a giant rocket, and a lot of it actually, in fact, the capsule is right up on top of it, and it launches that capsule that goes to the moon. The rocket itself falls over the ocean, and they have to grab it back. When people come back, they also splash in the ocean in a tiny capsule, and then they are rescued, or not rescued, but sort of like, hopefully somebody is waiting over there, and so on and so forth. But for the future, it was like, wow, I mean, that's not the way. The way is to have perhaps a space plane. And so a lot of emphasis went into the development of the space shuttle. And the idea for the space shuttle was that, well, just like airplanes have become commercial, they've become sort of like, routine. In the same way, space travel, first in low Earth orbit and then go to the moon, is going to become routine. And it was an expensive project, not as expensive as Apollo, but that was the goal. The problem is that space shuttle program it started in the 80s and it ended in the, I think the last one was about 15 years ago, around that time. It never became cheap, nor it ever became safe. So the accident rate for the space shuttle was around 1 in every 120, 130 flights, which is an unacceptable rate for if you are thinking about, well, it's going to be commercial. So, and then eventually it got discontinued. So there was a lot of effort that was put into a program that actually never really, no pun intended, never actually took off. Now, there were a lot of critics of the space shuttle program earlier on, but that is one of the reasons why it never really went on. And also the end of the Cold War, to a certain degree, you would have expected that end of the Cold War, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, there would be an incentive to say, you know what, let's build the future that we were promised in things like Star Trek, like, that, okay, well, we may not have those big wars, we can actually put our resources into space. That never happens. That didn't happen. And so to a certain degree, the priorities went down, and the Apollo's infrastructure over the period of time, because it's hard to maintain the infrastructure, everything was put into the shuttle program, that got dismantled. And so it took time again to build the program to go back to the moon.
So yeah, and if I'm not believed, so the space shuttle was also designed to be basically a laboratory in space as well, essentially, right? Yeah.
Yeah, low Earth orbit. So it was supposed to be, but eventually in some sense, eventually the plan was that first low Earth orbit, and then maybe we could have these kind of space planes going all the way to the moon and coming back. That never happened.
Yeah. So what are the overarching goals of the Artemis program? To simply go beyond returning humans to the moon, and how does it aim to establish sustained lunar presence and a broader space infrastructure, essentially?
So Artemis program, and by the way, for those familiar with Greek mythologies, Artemis was the sister of Apollo, so twin sister. So I think that's the way it is named. So the Artemis program right now, the way it is planned, and it has changed a little bit, is that right now the mission to the moon, it's not a landing mission. This is Artemis II. It's going to orbit around it, and the astronauts are going to come back. Artemis I was an uncrewed flight, similar type of trajectory, uncrewed, and it came back. Now humans are in it. In 2028, there are plans for Artemis III, which originally was supposed to land on the moon, but now it's not going to land on the moon. It's again going to test out sort of like orbital docking and things like that. And then Artemis IV, also in 2028. Right now the plan is for humans to land on the moon. And in this case, by humans, I mean American humans. Whereas the Chinese, they also have a plan for landing on the moon, taikonauts in that context, before 2030. We don't exactly know when. So part of the impetus for Artemis date for 2028 has to do with China, and also, I mean, I think they haven't explicitly said it, but it would be in theory, the last term of President Trump, 2028. So I think they also want to do that. But there are plans for this time for establishing a permanent base on the moon. And so the Artemis 4 mission is expected to go and land towards the lunar South Pole. Now, this is crucial because in order to have a permanent presence on the moon, one of the key ingredients that you need is water. Launching water, taking water with you, it's very, very expensive. I mean, when you think about launch costs, it's weight, and water is pretty heavy. And if you want to live over there, you need to find you need to have water there. In 2009 and 10, actually, an Indian orbiter first detected it, and then it was confirmed by others as well. It actually detected water ice on the North and the South Pole, much more on the South Pole than compared to the North Pole. And that was a surprising discovery. The reason why there is water on the moon, or water ice on the moon, is because moon doesn't have a tilt. So Earth, people may be familiar with that, sort of like, that has a 23.5-degree tilt. That's the reason why you have seasons and so on and so forth. Moon is actually almost vertical with respect to the plane of the solar system, or with respect to the sun. It's actually vertical, almost 98 degrees or so. So if you have as is the case on the moon, craters. Well, if you are right on the South Pole or the North Pole, the sun rays, when they come in, there are certain areas in that crater which will never see the sun. You will never see sunlight. Astronomers call those permanently shadowed regions, or if you want to impress people, PSRs. Okay, so permanently shadowed regions. And it is in those regions that water has not evaporated. Where does the water come from? Well, moon doesn't have an atmosphere, so everything collides on it, small pieces of rocks to asteroids and a long time ago comets as well. And they all have water in them. And so the water has collected in these craters, but there is no direct sunlight, so it has never sublimated, it has never melted, and it's there in those permanently shadowed regions. So that is the place. We exactly don't know how much water is there, but that is the place where there are plans both from the Artemis program led by the US and the Chinese Lunar Research Station led by China to actually have a base over there, because you can actually get this water ice. It is on the surface. And the rims of these craters, because again, with that sort of like configuration, the moon is vertical, sun is on the side, the rims of the craters are always in the sun. They never get on shade. So the idea is to actually build solar energy stations right on the rims of crater. So the Artemis 4 mission is going to land closer to the lunar South Pole and start building a base over there. Of course, there's going to be a lot of robotic missions going there. China also has a plan, I think it's actually more recently, to actually send a robot to the South Pole and to try 3D printing, sort of like construction material. So there's going to be a lot of activity towards the lunar South Pole. And China has not explicitly given a specific date, but I think within the next, it's a similar time frame. From the Artemis program, the idea is that this base towards the lunar South Pole is going to get established by 2033. Is it going to happen? We don't know. But China has also similar time frames regarding that. So that's a big difference from the Apollo program. The program is structured around building permanent presence on the moon.